What if John F. Kennedy never ran for president in 1980? What would change the re-election from 1960 to 2024? Lyndon B. Johnson gets the Democratic nomination. Lyndon B. Johnson would pick Adlai Stevenson as his running mate. 1960 election, Johnson-Stevenson vs. Nixon Lodge Jr. Richard Nixon wins 1960. Richard Nixon would continue the legacy of Dwight D. Eisenhower and expand welfare. Richard Nixon would also lower taxes, be for military spending. In 1961, the Battle of Pigs invasion would start. The Vietnam War would start in 1963. And I highly doubt that Richard Nixon would get assassinated. He does get an assassination attempt in 1963, but survives. Let's talk more about his presidency. He signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964, like Johnson. 1964 U.S. election. Nixon Lodge Jr. vs. Humphrey Muskie. Richard Nixon wins re-election in 1964 easily with 347 electoral votes. His second term goes very well. He still continues the legacy of Dwight D. Eisenhower and does all the things that I mentioned in his first term. And blacks would start to get more comfortable around whites. Whites would begin to treat black people easily, making Nixon even more popular. But some problems are starting to come into Nixon's second term. The Vietnam War becomes a problem. Many people die in the Vietnam War. And it's not looking so good for America for the Vietnam War. Because of this, Richard Nixon is kind of criticized for it. But other than that, he is still popular. 1968 U.S. election. McCarthy Muskie vs. Lodge Jr. Ford. Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. wins 1968, continuing on Richard Nixon's and Dwight D. Eisenhower's legacy. There would be no Watergate scandal in 1971, and the Vietnam War would end in 1972. In the 1970 midterms, the Democrats win both the House and Senate, and it's not looking that good for the Republicans. 1972 U.S. election. McCarthy Muskie vs. Lodge Jr. Ford. McCarthy wins the 1972 election easily with 388 electoral votes. The reason why Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. lost is because of the Democrats winning the House and Senate, giving the Democrats a boost in 1972. Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. would also be caught lying about his raising taxes when he was running for re-election. Let's talk about McCarthy's first term. McCarthy has a good first term in afflicting with China and the Soviet Union, and lowers taxes, beef up military spending too, and continued the legacies of Franklin D. Roosevelt and Harry Truman, and expands the New Deal. 1976 U.S. election. McCarthy Humphrey vs. Bush Anderson. MacArthur wins re-election in 1976 easily. Eugene MacArthur would have a good term due to lowering taxes. Although Eugene McCarthy does get impeached in 1983 for abuse of power, he is still very popular. Eugene MacArthur would also beef up military spending. 1980 U.S. election. Kennedy Muskie vs. Dor Reagan. Ted Kennedy wins 1980. Continuing on Eugene MacArthur's legacy. Gaylord Hart, the vice president of Ted Kennedy, would support new technology and cars and help with Ted Kennedy's agenda. Ted Kennedy would also support cars and new technology. Astronauts would have been sent to the moon in 1983. And Ted Kennedy would likely be really liked for that. But anyway, Ted Kennedy would also continue the legacy of Eugene McCarthy and expand the New Deal and lower taxes and lower tariffs too. 1984 U.S. election, Anderson Bush vs. Kennedy Hart. Ted Kennedy wins re-election in 1984. Not that much to say about his second term. Democrats nominated Vice President Gaylord Hart in 1988, and he would nominate Geraldine Falardo, while the Republicans would go with probably someone like Bob Dole, and Bob Dole would nominate John B. Anderson. 1988 U.S. election, Hart Falardo vs. Dole Anderson. Gaylord Hart wins the 1988 election easily. 1992 U.S. election. Hart Falardo vs. Bush Cheney. Gaylord Hart blows up and destroys George H.W. Bush. As during George H.W. Bush's campaign, he was caught about lying about not raising taxes, which led to Gaylord Hart easily winning re-election with 379 electoral votes, winning states like Louisiana, Alaska, and Montana, and Colorado. But anyway, let's talk about his second term. In his second term, Gaylord Hart would continue the legacy of Ted Kennedy and expand social program and child labor's right and women's right too. Whites would treat black equally more than they used to back then. 1996 U.S. election, Falardo Mondale vs. Cheney Giuliani. Geraldine Falardo wins the 1996 election, continuing on Gaylord Hart's and Ted Kennedy's legacy. But however, Geraldine Falardo would have a bad term, as Geraldine Falardo wouldn't be able to do anything to prevent the U.S.A. from declaring war on Japan. Japan declares war on the U.S.A. as, for no reason, Japan thinks that the U.S.A. bombed them, even though it's not true. Geraldine Falardo becomes unpopular when she asked Congress to declare a war on Japan, which they promptly did. and the U.S.A. kicked butt in that election, but Junior Villardo was unpopular. 2000 U.S. election, Villardo Mondale vs. Giuliani Bush. Rudy Giuliani wins 2000. The 9/11 attacks wouldn't happen in this timeline, but they would still be in Iraq war. The 2004 tsunami would devastate a lot of the states in the USA. 2004 US election, Giuliani Bush vs. Edwards Kelly. Rudy Giuliani destroys John Edwards, as during his campaign, Edwards was caught having a scandal of him cheating on his wife, Elizabeth. Rudy Giuliani would have a good term. There was no 2008 recession, as it's looking like it might happen in 2011 in this timeline. The Iraq War would also stop in 2007. George W. Bush would get the Republican nominee in 2008 with Dick Cheney, but the Democrats would nominate Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. 2008 U.S. election, Bush-Cheney vs. Clinton-Biden. George W. Bush easily wins the election. Not that much to say about his presidency, other about the 2011 Great Recession. It has no impact on Bush's presidency. 2012 U.S. election, Obama-Kane vs. Bush-Cheney. George W. Bush wins re-election in 2012, but then things would get more worse. The 2011 financial crisis would not stop, and George W. Bush would not withdraw any of the troops from Afghanistan or Iraq, making it only worse. In 2016, the Democrats nominate Barack Obama again with Hillary Clinton, while the Republicans go with Dick Cheney and John Kasich. 2016 U.S. election, Obama-Clinton vs. Cheney-Kasich. Barack Obama wins 2016 with 279 electoral votes, relatively narrowly. Barack Obama would withdraw all the troops from Afghanistan and Iraq. And the 2011 financial crisis would finally come to an end. And thanks to Obamacare, the COVID-19 pandemic, it suddenly starts to get a bit better. 2020 U.S. election, Obama-Clinton vs. Bush-Rubio. Barack Obama wins re-election in 2020 with a landslide of 359 electoral votes. 2024 U.S. election, Rubio-Kasich vs. Clinton-Warren. Marco Rubio wins 2024. 1960, Richard Nixon. 1964, Richard Nixon. 1978, Henry Kellogg Jr. 1972, Eugene McCarthy. 1976, Eugene McCarthy. 1980, Ted Kennedy. 1984, Ted Kennedy. 1988, Gerald Hart. 1992, Gerald Hart. 1996, Geraldine Ferraro. 2000, George W. Bush. 2004, George W. Bush. 2008, Rudy Giuliani. 2012, Rudy Giuliani. 2016, Barack Obama. 2020, Barack Obama. 2024, Marco Rubio. Thanks for watching. Subscribe.